One of the major tourist attractions in visiting Turkey is a trip to the 7 cities, 7 churches of Minor Asia. Archaeological findings in surprisingly manner mirror what we read in the messages to the 7 churches that we find in the book of Revelation. Welcome to Tidbits from Revelation. I'm Dr. Paul Petersen, and today we're going to look at chapter 2 and 3. We will do that next time as well because they overlap, and we will begin in chapter 1. In chapter 1, Jesus presents himself to John, and what we find in chapter 2 is the oral continuation of the visionary part. John actually sees Jesus, but the messages to the 7 churches are messages Jesus speaks, which John writes down and then sends on to the churches. So, contrary to common perception, John doesn't see these churches. He's not like a tourist. By the way, the tourists only see the ruins. That is, a corpse, not the real life of these churches or these cities as when they were at the present time of John. Now, these 7 messages is the first of a series of 7s in the book of Revelation. The major ones follow with the seals, 7 seals on the book, and 7 trumpets. Then you have 7 plagues, and there are a lot of other 7s in the book, but these are the major ones. And one of the major issues is how to understand their internal relationship. I do believe that the first 3 major series of 7 are in parallel, just like in the book of Daniel you have parallel prophecies, parallel visions. But we will get back to that next time around. Now, these letters are not normal letters. If you read the other epistles of the New Testament, you quickly realize that these 7 messages to the churches are not written in normal language. They are highly metaphorical, and they are very tightly structured. In each of these, Jesus presents himself to the churches with features mentioned that you find in the opening chapter, chapter 1, in the description of Jesus. Thus says he, and then you have the description. He who is Amen, who is a creator of everything, to paraphrase the expression to Laodicea. So these are not normal letters. They are part of an apocalyptic, symbolic vision or book. Now, what are they? And one suggestion probably gives a good indication. They are like status reports within an agreement or covenant, to use a typical biblical term. Like in the days of the Old Testament, a king would write to and present to a group of people or city with which he had an agreement. And he will tell who he was. He will describe the relationship historically as it has developed until then. Then he would come with some warnings, and he will bring witnesses. In this case, the witness to what is going on is the Holy Spirit. And then he will close with some blessings or curses. In this case, the blessings are all expressed as promises to the one in the churches who will be victorious. Now, let's read and to the first of these 7 churches, which is Ephesus. Jesus says, I know your works. First he has told them, to the angel of the church in Ephesus write the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. Chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Now, this expression points back to one of the features, the characteristics of Jesus in the previous chapter. And then he says, I know your works. He repeats that to almost all of the churches. That is like, I know what you have done, and maybe what you have not done. This is not only a king speaking to the city with which he had an agreement. This is like a judge telling them, I know what you did. The messages could be seen as an excerpt from the book of deeds, which the churches will face on the future day of judgment. So they include a warning. Change if necessary. Keep to what I have given you. This is what you have to do to stay with me and be victorious also in the end. Now, chapter 1 closes with a statement in verse 19 that is often seen as an indication of the structure of the whole book. I don't believe that, but as is often claimed, I will look at this text anyway. Jesus speaks to John, and tells him, write therefore the things that you have seen, those that are, and those that are to take place after this. Some people see in this a three-part division of the book of Revelation as a whole. What you have seen would then be Jesus, what is would be the seven churches, and what is to come will be from chapter 4 and onwards. The problem with that is, of course, that in this case, the seven churches are not seen as prophetic at all. But however they are understood prophetically, there are clear indications of future elements in the messages to the churches. So I don't really believe that solution or that way of reading the text is valid. Another suggestion is to read the text this way. Write therefore the things that you have seen, both those that are and those that are to take place in the future. In that case, people would say the churches are those that are and the rest is future. The same argument holds. The messages to the churches also contain future elements of how the churches will develop. And then, of course, he didn't see the messages to the churches. He saw Jesus. Now, if prophetic, how should we understand that? And let me make it clear, as my introduction would imply also. There's no doubt that the seven messages to the seven churches would have fit exactly to the time period in which John was writing. When these messages were sent to the churches as part of the book and read for their divine worship, no doubt people would have recognized the situation. This is how we are. This is our city. If not, maybe just have thrown it out. It wouldn't have made any sense. But the next question is, why are exactly these seven churches chosen? And one part of that answer is that they were all located in a caravan route when you travel from Ephesus and around in the province of Asia, that is the Roman province of Asia. You would visit these churches on your way. But there are churches and cities that he could have visited and would have visited in a normal caravan route that are not there. Why not Colossae or Hierapolis? Just as important cities as Laodicea. So those seven cities have been chosen from among the possible cities on that caravan route because they contain the message that would be relevant for other periods of time than the time of John. Throughout history, it has been common to understand these seven churches then as a prophetic indication or periodization of the church history to come. I'll not go into all the details, but let me read to one of these churches the message that Jesus sent and give an indication of how to understand it from that perspective. That would be the second in the series. That is Smyrna. We find that in verse 8, where Jesus says, "And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last who died and came to life," with the reference, once again, in the presentation of Jesus, back to the opening vision. "I know your tribulation and your poverty, yet you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death." So here you have the presentation of the king. Jesus tells who he is. Then he speaks at the judge, "I know your tribulation." In this case, he is very praiseful of this church. Then there's some warnings. You have the description of the history, of course, and the main theme is death. This church will face the experience of death, so that the promise to those who are conquerors is that they will not be hurt by the second death. Historically, that fits extremely well with the church during the persecutions of the Roman Empire. The first church has gone, the first victories. Now it's the second, it's Smyrna. It faces, prophetically described here by Jesus, an experience of death, but there is victory promised. Thank you for listening to this tidbit, and we will move on trying to give further overview of the 7 churches with some samples as we look next time at tidbits from Revelation chapter 3.